Welcome back to the BFG by Roald Dahl, read by Mr. Mike. And today we've got a big task ahead of ourselves, so I hope you're sitting comfortable because we're going to go through, I think, 4 or 5 chapters. And we're going to learn a lot more about what happens in dream catching and what happens in giant country. So I urge you to get comfortable, get your book open and ready if you're going to follow the story with me, or if maybe you're sitting in your room before you go to bed, get comfy, because we are going to start with learning a bit more about dream catching. The big friendly giant put the suitcase on the ground. He bent down low so that his enormous face was close to Sophie's. "From now on, we is keeping as still as winky little miceys," he whispered. Sophie nodded. The misty vapour swirled around her. It made her cheeks damp and left dewdrops in her hair. The BFG opened the suitcase and took out several empty glass jars. He set them all along the ground, with their screw tops removed. Then he stood up very straight. His head was now high up in the swirling mist, and it kept disappearing, then appearing again. He was holding the long net in his right hand. Sophie, staring upwards, saw through the mist that his colossal ears were beginning to swivel out from his head. They began waving gently to and fro. Suddenly the BFG pounced. He leapt high in the air and swung the net through the mist with a great swishing sweep of his arm. "Got him!" he cried. "A jar! A jar! Quick, quick, quick!" Sophie picked up a jar and held it up to him. He grabbed hold of it. He lowered the net. Very carefully, he tipped something absolutely invisible from the net into the jar. He dropped the net and swiftly clapped one hand over the jar. "The top!" he whispered. "The jar top, quick!" Sophie picked up the screw top and handed it to him. He screwed it on tight and the jar was closed. The BFG was very excited. He held the jar close to one ear and listened intently. "Oh, it's a wink squiffler," he whispered with a thrill in his voice. It's even better. It's a fizz wizard, a golden fizz wizard." Sophie stared at him. Oh my, he said, holding the jar in front of him. "This will be giving some little toddler a very happy night when I is blowing this dream into their room." "Is it a really good one?" Sophie asked. "A good one?" he cried. "It's a golden fizz wizard." "It is not often I is getting one of these." He handed the jar to Sophie and said, "Please be still as a starfish now. I is thinking there may be a whole swarm of fizz wizards up there today. And do kindly stop breathing. You is terribly noisy down there." "I haven't moved a muscle," Sophie said. "Then don't," the BFG answered sharply. Once again he stood up tall in the mist, holding his net at the ready. Then came the long silence, the waiting and listening, and at last, with surprising suddenness, came a leap and a swish of the net. "Another jar!" he cried. "Quick, quick, quick!" When the second dream was safely in the jar and the top was screwed down, the BFG held it close to his ear again. "Oh no!" he cried. "Oh, mince my maggots! Oh, swipe my swoggles!" "What's the matter?" Sophie asked. It's a Trogglehumper!" he shouted. His voice was filled with fury and anguish. "Oh, save our solos!" he cried. "Deliver us from weasels! The devil is dancing on my dibbler!" "What are you talking about?" Sophie asked. The BFG was getting more distressed every moment. "I'll bash my eye bones!" he cried, waving the jar in the air. "I come all this way to get lovely golden dreams, and what is I catching?" "What are you catching?" Sophie asked. "I is catching a frightsome Trogglehumper," he cried. "This is a bad, bad dream. It is worse than a bad dream. It's a nightmare." "Oh dear," Sophie said. "What will you do with that?" "I is never letting it go," the BFG cried. "If I do, then some poor little toddler will be having the most curd-bloodling time. This one is a real kicksy bog humper. I is exploding it as soon as I get home." "Nightmares are horrible," Sophie said. "I had one once and I woke up sweating all over." Oh, with this one, you'll be waking up screaming all over, the BFG said. This one would make your teeth stand on end. If this one got into you, your blood would be freezing into icicles and your skin would be creeping across the floor. Is it as bad as that? It's worse, cried the BFG. This is a real wopsy gobstitcher. You said it was a Trogglehumper, Sophie told him. It is a Trogglehumper, cried the exasperated BFG. But it is also a bog thumper and a grob switcher. It is all three riddled into one. Oh, I'm so glad I was clutching it tight. Are you, you wicked beast, are you? He cried, holding up the jar and staring into it. Never more is you going to be blood bunk boodling the poor little human beanie topplers. Sophie, who was also staring into the glass jar, cried out, I can see it. There's something in there. Of course there's something in there, the BFG said. You was looking at a frightsome Trogglehumper. But you told me dreams were invisible. They's always invisible until they is captured, the BFG told her. After that, they is losing a little of their invisibility. We is seeing this one very clearly now. Inside the jar, Sophie could see the faint scarlet red outline of something that looked like a mixture between a blob of gas and a bubble of jelly. It was moving violently around, thrashing against the sides of the jar and forever changing its shape. It's wiggling all over the place, Sophie cried. It's fighting to get out of that jar. It's going to bash itself to bits. The nastier the dream, the angrier it is getting when it is in prison, the BFG said. It's the same as with wild animals. If an animal is very, very fierce and you is putting it into a cage, it will make a tremendous rumple-dumpers. If it is a nice animal, like a cockatoodle too, or a fogglefrump, it will sit quietly. Dreams is exactly the same. This one is nasty, fierce, bog-rotting nightmare. Ooh, just look at him splashing around against the glass. It's quite frightening, Sophie said. I'd be hating to get one of these inside me on a darksome night, the BFG said. So would I, Sophie replied. The BFG started putting the bottles back into the suitcase. Is that all? Sophie asked. Are we going? I is so upset by this troggle-humping, bog-thumping grob-switcher, the BFG said, that I is not wishing to go on. Dream catching is finished for today. Soon, Sophie was back in the waistcoat pocket and the BFG was racing home as fast as he could when at last they emerged out of the mist and came again onto the hot yellow wasteland. All the other giants were sprawled out on the ground, fast asleep. A Trogglehumper for the Fleshlumpeater. They's always having 50 winks before they go off scampering to hunt human beings in the evening, the BFG said to Sophie. He stopped for a few moments to let Sophie have a better look. Giants is only sleeping every now and then, he says. Not only as much as human beings. Human beings is crazy for sleeping. Is it ever occurring to you that a human being who is 50 is spending about 20 years fast asleep? I must admit, that never occurred to me, Sophie said. You should allow it to occur to you, the BFG said. Imagine it, please. This human being who says he is 50 has been fast asleep for 20 years and is not even knowing where he is. Not even doing anything. Not even thinking. It's a funny thought, Sophie said. Exactly, the BFG said. So what I is trying to explain to you is that a human being who says he is 50 is not really 50, he's only 30. What about me? Sophie said. I'm 8. You is not 8 at all, said the BFG. Human being babies and little chidlers is spending half in their time asleep. So you is only 4. I'm 8, Sophie said. You might think you was 8, the BFG said, but you has only spent 4 years of your life with your little eyes open. You is only 4, and please stop higgling me. Titchy little whipsnappers like you should not be higgling around with an old sage and onion who is hundreds of years more older than you. How much do giants sleep? Sophie asked. They is never wasting much time snozzling, the BFG said. 2 or 3 hours is enough. Even less, the BFG answered. I is only sleeping once in a blue baboon. Sophie, peeping out from her pocket, examined the 9 sleeping giants. They looked even more grotesque now that they were awake. Sprawled out across the yellow pane, they covered an area about the size of a football pitch. Most of them were lying on their backs with their enormous mouths wide open. And they were snoring like foghorns. The noise was awful. Suddenly, the BFG gave a jump in the air. By gum frog, he said. I was just having the most wopsy, whiffling idea. What? Sophie said. Wait, he cried. Hold your horse feathers. Keep your skirt on. Just you wait until see what I is going to bring about. He galloped off fast to his cave, and Sophie, hanging tight to the rim of his pocket, just waited. He rolled back the stone and entered the cave. He was very excited. He was moving quickly. You stay where you is in my pocket, Huggy Bee, he said. We is doing this lovely bit of buck swashing both together. He set aside the dream-catching net, but hung onto the suitcase. He ran across to the other side of the cave and grabbed the long trumpet thing, the one he had been carrying when Sophie had first seen him in the village. With the suitcase in one hand and the trumpet in the other, he dashed out of the cave. What is he up to now? Sophie wondered. Peep your head up good, the BFG said. Then you'll get a fine winkle of what's going on. When the BFG came near to the sleeping giants, he slowed his pace down. He began moving softly. He crept on his toes forwards towards the ugly brutes. They were all still snoring loudly. They looked repulsive, filthy, diabolical. The BFG tiptoed around them. He went past the gizzard gulper, the blood bottler, the meat dripper, the child chewer. Then he stopped. He had reached the Fleshlumpeater. He pointed at him and he looked down at Sophie and gave her a big wink. He knelt on the ground and very quietly he opened up the suitcase. He took out of it the glass jar containing the terrible, nightmarish Trogglehumper. At that point, Sophie guessed what was going to happen next. Ouch, she thought. This could be rather dangerous. She crouched lower in the pocket so that only the top of her head and her eyes were showing. She wanted to be ready to duck outside very fast should anything go wrong. They were about 10 feet away from the Fleshlumpeater's face. The snoring, snorting noise he was making was disgusting. Every now and again, a big bubble of spit formed between his 2 open lips, and then it would burst with a splash and cover his face with saliva. Taking infinite care, the BFG unscrewed the top of the glass jar and tipped the squiggling, squirming, faintly scarlet Trogglehumper into the wide end of his trumpet. He put the other end of the trumpet to his lips. He aimed the instrument directly at the Fleshlumpeater's face. He took a deep breath, puffed out his cheeks, and he blew. Sophie saw a flash of pale red go darting towards the giant's face. For a split second, it hovered above his face, and then it was gone. It seemed to have been sucked up the giant's nose, but it all happened so quickly, Sophie just couldn't be sure. We had better be skiddling away quick where it's safe, said the BFG. He trotted off for about 100 yards and then he stopped. He crouched low to the ground. Now, he said, we is waiting for the gun and flames to begin. They didn't have to wait very long. The air was suddenly pierced by the most fearful roar Sophie had ever heard, and she saw the Fleshlumpeater's body, all 54 feet of it, rise up off the ground and fall back down with a thump. Then it began to wriggle and twist and bounce in the most violent way. It was quite frightening to watch. Ah! Roared the Fleshlumpeater. Ah! He's still asleep, the BFG whispered. The terrible Troggle-humping nightmare is beginning to get him. Serves him right, Sophie said. She could feel no sympathy for this great brute who ate children as though they were sugar lumps. Save us! Screamed the Fleshlumpeater, thrashing about madly. He is after me! He is getting me! The thrashing of his arms and legs and the waving became more violent by the second. It was an awesome thing to watch such a massive creature having such mighty convulsions. It's Jack, bellowed the Fleshlumpeater. It's the grewful, gruncious Jack. Jack is after me. Jack is whack-crackling me. Jack is spike-sticking me. Jack is splash-splunking me. It's the terrible, fright-swiping Jack. The Fleshlumpeater was writhing about all over the ground like some colossal tortured snake. Oh, spare me, Jack, he yelled. Don't hurt me, Jack. Who is this Jack that he's on about? Sophie whispered. Jack is the only human being all giants is frightened of. The BFG told her. They is all absolutely terrified of Jack. They is all hearing that Jack is a famous giant killer. Save me, screamed the Fleshlumpeater. Have mercy on this poor little giant. The beanstalk is coming at me with his terrible spike-sticking beanstalk. Take it away, I is begging you, Jack. I is praying you not to touch me with your terrible spike-sticking beanstalk. Us giants, the BFG whispered, is not knowing very much about this dreaded human being called Jack. We is knowing only that he is a famous giant killer and that he is owing in something called a beanstalk. We is also knowing that the beanstalk is a fearsome thing and Jack used it to kill giants. Sophie couldn't stop smiling. What are you grigging about? The BFG asked her. I'll tell you later, Sophie said. The awful nightmare had now gripped the great brute to such an extent that he was tying his whole body into knots. Don't do it, Jack, he screeched. I was not eating you, Jack. I was never eating human beings. I swear I was never gobbled up a single human being in my wholesome life. Liar, said the BFG. Just then, one of the Fleshlumpeater's flailing fists caught the still fast asleep meat-dripping giant smack in the mouth. At the same time, one of his furiously thrashing legs kicked the snoring, gizzard-gulping giant right in the tummy. Both the injured giants woke up and leapt to their feet. He is swiping me right in the mouth, yelled the meat dripper. He is bung swoggling me, smack in the tummy, shouted the gizzard gulper. The two of them rushed at the Fleshlumpeater and began pounding him with their fists and feet. The wretched Fleshlumpeater woke up with a bang. He awoke straight from one nightmare into another. He roared into battle, and in the bellowing, thumping and rough and tumble that followed, one sleeping giant after another either got stepped on or kicked. Soon all 9 of them were on their feet, having the most almighty free-for-all. They punched and kicked and scratched and bit and butted each other as hard as they could. Blood flowed, noses went crunch, teeth fell out like hailstones. The giants roared and screamed and cursed, and for many minutes the noise of battle rolled across the yellow plain. The BFG smiled a big wide smile of absolute pleasure. I is loving it when they is all having a good tough and rumble. They'd kill each other, Sophie said. Never, said the BFG. Those beasts is always bishing and walloping each other. Soon it will be getting dusky and they will be galloping off to fill their tummies. They're coarse and foul and filthy, Sophie said. I hate them. As soon as the BFG headed back to the cave, he said quietly, we certainly was putting that nightmare to good use though, wasn't we? Excellent use, Sophie said. Well done, you. Dreams. The big friendly giant was seated at the great table in his cave and he was doing his homework. Sophie sat cross-legged on the tabletop nearby, watching him work. The glass jar containing the one and only good dream that had been caught that day stood between the two of them. The BFG, with great care and patience, was printing something out on a piece of paper with an enormous pencil. "What are you writing?" Sophie asked him. "Every dream is having a special label on the bottle," the BFG said. "How else could I be finding the one I am wanting in a hurry?" "But you can really and truly tell what sort of dream it's going to be simply by listening to it?" Sophie asked. "I can," said the BFG, not looking up. "But how? Is it by the way it hums and buzzes?" "You is less or more right," the BFG said. "Every dream in the world is making a different sort of buzzy hum. And these grand swashbuckling ears of mine is able to read that music." "By music do you mean tunes?" "I is not meaning tunes." "Then what do you mean?" "Human beings is having their own music, right or left." "Right," Sophie said. "Lots of music. And sometimes human beings is very overcome when they is hearing wondrous music. They is getting shivers down their spindles, right or left." "Right," Sophie said. "So the music is saying something to them. It is sending them a message. I do not think human beings is knowing what that message is, but they is loving it all just the same." "That's about right," Sophie said. "But because of these jump-squiffling ears of mine," the BFG said, "I is not only able to hear the music that dreams is making, but I is also understanding it." "What do you mean understanding it?" Sophie said. "I can read it," the BFG said. "It talks to me. It's like a language." "I find that just a little hard to believe," Sophie said. "I bet you is also find it hard to believe in Cogwinkles," the BFG said, "and how they is visiting us from the stars." "Of course I don't believe that," Sophie said. The BFG regarded her gravely with those huge eyes of his. "I hope you will forgive me," he said, "if I tell you that human beings is thinking they is very clever, but they is not. They is nearly all of them not munchers and squeaky pips." "I beg your pardon," Sophie said. "The matter with human beings," the BFG went on, "is that they're absolutely refusing to believe anything unless they're actually seeing it right in front of their own schnozzles. Of course, Cogwinkles is exciting. I's meeting them very oftenly. I's even chittering with them." He turned away contemptuously from Sophie and resumed his writing. Sophie moved over to read, but he wasn't moving out of her way so she could see. The letters, though, were printed big and bold, and they were not very well formed. Here is what it said. "This dream is about how I is saving my teacher from drowning. I is diving into the river from a high bridge, and I is dragging my teacher to the bank, and then I is giving him the kiss of death." "The kiss of what?" Sophie asked. The BFG stopped writing and raised his head slowly. His eyes rested on Sophie's face. "I is telling you once before, I is never having a chance to go to school. I is full of mistakes. That is not my fault. I do my best. You is a lovely little girl, but please remember that you is not exactly Miss Know Everything yourself." "I'm sorry," Sophie said. I really am. It's very rude of me to keep correcting you like this." The BFG gazed at her for a while longer. Then he bent his head again to his slow, laborious writing. "Tell me honestly," Sophie asked, "if you blew this dream into my bedroom when I was asleep, would I really and truly start dreaming about how I saved my teacher from drowning by diving off the bridge?" "More," the BFG said, "a lot more. But I cannot be squibbling the whole grub flunking dream in a titchy bit of paper. Of course there is a lot more." The BFG laid down his pencil and placed one massive ear close to the jar. For about 30 seconds he listened intently. "Yes," he said, nodding his great head up and down. "This dream is continuing very nicely." "How does it end?" Sophie said. "Please tell me." "You would be dreaming," the BFG said, "that the morning after you was saving the teacher from the river. You was arriving at school and you was seeing all the 500 pupils sitting in the assembly hall and all the teachers as well. And the head teacher is then standing up and saying, 'I is wanting the whole school to give 3 cheers for Sophie because she is so brave and is saving the life of our fine maths teacher, Mr. Figgins, who was unfortunately pushed off the bridge into the river by our gym teacher, Miss Amelia Upscotch. So 3 cheers for Sophie. And the whole school is then cheering like mad and shouting, bravo, well done. And for even after that, even when you was getting your sums all gum-swiggled and muggled up, Mr. Figgins is always giving you 10 out of 10 and writing, good work, Sophie, in your exercise book. Then you was waking up. Oh, I like that dream, Sophie said. Of course you like it, the BFG said. It's a fizz wizard. He licked the back of the label and stuck it on the jar. I was usually writing a bit more about this, but you was watching me and making me jumpsy. I'll go and sit somewhere else, Sophie said. No, don't go. Look in the jar carefully and I think you'll be seeing this dream. Sophie peered into the jar and there, sure enough, she saw the faint, translucent outline of something about the size of a chicken's egg. There was just a touch of colour in it, a pale sea green, soft and shimmering and very beautiful. There it lay, this small oblong sea green jellyish thing at the bottom of the jar, quite peacefully, but pulsing gently. The whole of it moving in and out ever so slightly, as though it were breathing. It's moving, Sophie cried. It's alive! Of course it's alive. What will you feed it on? Sophie asked. Oh, it's not feeding any food, BFG told her. That's cruel, Sophie said. Everything alive needs some sort of food. Even trees and plants. The north wind is alive, the BFG said. It is moving, it touches you on the cheek and on the hands, but nobody's feeding it. Sophie was silent. This extraordinary giant was disturbing her ideas. He seemed to be leading her towards mysteries that were beyond her understanding. A dream is not needing anything, the BFG went on. If it is a good one, it is wasting peaceably forever until it's released to do its good job. If it is a bad one, it is always fighting to get out. The BFG stood up and walked over to one of the many shelves and placed the latest jar among the thousands of others. Please, can we see some of the other dreams? Sophie asked him. The BFG hesitated. Nobody has ever seen them before, he said, but perhaps after all I is letting you have a little peep. He picked her up off the table and stood her on the palm of one of his huge hands. He carried her towards the shelf. Over here is some of the good dreams, he said, the fizz wizards. Would you hold me closer so I can read the labels? My labels is only telling bits of it, the BFG said. The dream is usually much longer. The label is just to remind me. Sophie started to read the labels. The first one seemed long enough to her. It went right round the jar, and as she read it, she had to keep turning the jar. This is what it said about the dream. Today I is sitting in class and I discover that if I is staring very hard at my teacher in a special way, I is able to put her to sleep. So I keep staring at her, and in the end her head drops onto her desk and she goes fast asleep and snorkles loudly. Then in marches the head teacher and he shouts, "Wake up, Miss Plumridge! How dare you go to sleep in class? Go fetch your hat and coat and leave this school forever. You is sacked." But in a jiffy I is putting the head teacher to sleep as well. And he just crumples slowly to the floor like a lump of jelly. And there he lies all in a deep heap and starts snorkeling even louder than Miss Plumridge. And then I is hearing my mummy's voice saying, "Wake up, for your breakfast is ready." What a funny dream, Sophie said. Oh, Sophie could see the putting to sleep dream lying peacefully on the bottom, gently pulsing sea green like. Do you have any separate dreams for boys and girls? Of course I do, said the BFG. If I is given a girl's dream to a boy, even if it's a really whoopsie girly dream, the boy will be waking up and thinking, what a rot-bunkling, grink-sludging old dream that was. Boys would, Sophie said. These here is all girls' dreams on this shelf, the BFG said. Oh, can I read a boy's dream? You can, the BFG said. He lifted her to a higher shelf. The label on the nearest boy's dream jar read like this: I is making myself a marvellous pair of suction boots, and when I put them on, I is able to walk straight up the kitchen wall and across the ceiling. Well, I is walking upside down on the ceiling when my big sister comes in, and she is starting to yell at me, and she, just like she always does, yelling, "What on earth are you doing up there, walking on the ceiling?" And I looks down at her and smiles, and I say, I told you you was driving me up the wall, and now you has finally done it." I find that one rather silly, Sophie said. "Boys wouldn't," the BFG said, grinning. "It's another ring beller." "Perhaps you have seen enough now." "Oh, let me read another boy's dream," Sophie said. The next label said: "The telephone rings in our house, and my father picks it up and says in his very important telephone voice, 'Simpkins speaking.' Then his face goes white and his voice goes all funny, and he says, 'What? Who?' And then he says, 'Yes, sir, I understand, sir, but surely it is me you is wishing to speak to, not my little son.' My father's face is going from white to dark purple, and he is gulping like he has a lobster stuck in his throat. And then at last he is saying, 'Yes, sir, very well, sir, I will get him, sir.' And he turns to me and says in rather a respectful voice, 'Is you knowing the President of the United States?' And I says, 'No, but I expect he is hearing about me.' Then I is having a long talk on the phone and saying things like, 'Let me take care of it, Mr. President. You'll bungle it all up if you do it.' And my father's eyes is goggling right out of his head, and that is when I is hearing my father's real voice saying, 'Get up, you lazy slob, or you'll be late for school.' Boys are crazy, Sophie said. 'Let me read this next label.' Sophie started reading what this dream said. I is having a bath, and I is discovering that if I press quite hard on my belly button, a funny feeling comes all over me, and suddenly my legs is not there anymore. Oh, neither are my arms. In fact, I has become absolutely invisible all over. I is still there, but no one can see me, not even myself. So my mummy comes in and says, 'Where is that child?' 'He was in the bath a minute ago, and he can't possibly have washed himself properly.' So I says, 'Here I is.' And she says, 'Where?' And I say, 'Here.' And she says, 'Where?' And I say, 'Here.' And she yells, 'Henry, come up here, quick.' And when my daddy rushes in, I is washing myself, and my daddy sees the soap floating around in the air. But of course, he is not seeing me, and he shouts, 'Where are you, boy?' And I say, 'Here.' And he says, 'Where?' And I say, 'Here.' And he says, 'Where?' And I say, 'Here.' And he says, 'The soap, boy, the soap. It's flying in the air.' Then I press my tummy button again, and now I is visible. My daddy is squiffy with excitement. He says, 'You is the invisible boy.' And I says, 'Now I is going to have some fun.' So when I is at the bath and I have dried myself, I put on my dressing gown and my slippers, and I press my tummy button again to become invisible, and I go downstairs, and I go out into town, and I walk around in the street. Of course, only my body is invisible, but not the things I is wearing. So when people is seeing a dressing gown and slippers floating along the street with nobody in it, there is a panic with everybody yelling, 'A ghost! A ghost!' And people are screaming left and right, and big strong policemen is running for their lives. And best of all, I can see Mr. Grummett, my maths teacher, coming out of a building, and I float up to him and say, 'Boo!' And he lets out a frightsome howl and dashes back inside. And then I is waking up and feeling happy as a whiff squiddler. Pretty ridiculous, Sophie said. All the same, she couldn't resist reaching down and pressing her own tummy button to see if it worked. Nothing happened at all. Dreams is very mystical things, the BFG said. Human beings is not understanding them very much at all. Not even their brainiest professors is understanding them. Have you seen enough? Just this last one, said Sophie. This one here. She started reading the dream. I has written a book, and it is so exciting nobody can put it down. As soon as you has read the first line, you are so hooked on it, you cannot stop until the last page. In all the cities, people is walking in the streets bumping into each other because their faces is buried in my book, and dentists is reading it and trying to fill teeth at the same time, but nobody minds because they is all reading it too in the dentist's chair. Drivers is reading it while driving, and cars is crashing all over the country. Brain surgeons is reading it while they're operating on brains, and airline pilots is reading it and going to Timbuktu instead of London. Football players is reading it on the field because they can't put it down, and so is Olympic runners while they're running. Everybody has to see what is going to happen next in my book, and when I wake up, I am still tingling with excitement at being the greatest writer the world has ever known. Until my mummy comes in and says, I was looking at your English exercise book last night, boy, and really, your spelling is atrocious. And so is your punctuation. That's enough for now, the BFG said. There is billions more, but my arm is getting tired holding you up. What are all those over there? Sophia said. Why have they got such tiny labels? That, the BFG said, is because one day I was catching so many dreams I was not having time or energy to write out long labels. But there's enough there to remind me. Can I look? Said Sophie. The long-suffering BFG carried her across the jars. Sophie read them rapidly, one after the other. I is climbing Mount Everest with just my pussycat for company. And the next one. I is inventing a car that runs on toothpaste instead of petrol. And the next one. I is able to make the electric lights go on and off just by thinking about it. And the next. I is only an 8-year-old little boy, but I is growing a splendid bushy beard, and all the other boys is jealous. And the next one. I is able to jump out of any high window and float down safely. And then one more she read. I has a pet bee that makes rock and roll music when it flies. What amazes me, Sophie said, is how you ever learned to write in the first place. Ah, said the BFG. I has been wondering how long it is before you was asking me that. Considering you never went to school, I think it's quite marvellous, Sophie said. How did you learn? One night, I was blowing a dream through a window and I see this book lying on this little boy's bedroom table. I wanted it so very badly, you understand, but I was refusing to steal it. I would never do that. So how did you get it? I borrowed it. Just for a short time, I borrowed it. How long have you had it? Sophie said. Maybe about 80 years. Soon I shall be putting it back. And that's how you taught yourself to write? Sophie said. I was reading it hundreds of times, the BFG said, and I was still reading it and teaching new words to myself and how to write them. It's the most scrumdiddlyumptious story. Sophie took the book out of his hand. Nicholas Nickleby. She read out loud. Oh, by Dahl Chickens, the BFG said. Who? Sophie said. Just then, there came a tremendous noise of galloping feet from outside the cave. What's that? Sophie cried. That is all the giants zip-fizzing off to another country to guzzle human beings, the BFG said. He quickly popped Sophie back into his waistcoat and then hurried to the cave entrance and rolled back the stone. Sophie, peeping out from her spy hole, saw all 9 of the fearsome giants coming past at full gallop. Where is you off to tonight? Shouted the BFG. We is off to Fleshlumpeater to England tonight, and said the Fleshlumpeater, and they went galloping past. England is a lunctious land where he's fancying a few nice English chidlers. I, shouted the maid basher. I is knowing where there is a giggle house for girls, and I is guzzling myself a whole froth blower. And I know where there's a boggle box for boys, shouted the gizzard gulper. All I has to do is reach in and grab myself a handful. English boys is tasting extra squishy. There's not a thing we can do about this tonight, said the BFG. We're as helpless as horse feathers. He sat down on a large craggy blue rock near the entrance to his cave. He took Sophie from his pocket and put her beside him on the rock. It is now quite safe for you to be outside until there's coming back, he said. The sun had dipped behind the horizon and it was getting dark. The great plan. We've absolutely got to stop them, Sophie cried. Put me back in your pocket quick and we'll chase after them and warn everyone in England that they're coming. Ridunculous and impossible. They is going 2 times as fast as me and is finishing their guzzle before we is halfway. How many girls and boys are they going to eat though? Oh, many, said the BFG. The flesh lump eating giant alone has a most scrackling whoopsie appetite. He'll eat them like peas out of a puddle. I can't bear to think about it. They don't, said the BFG. For years and years I was sitting here on this very rock every night when they was galloping away, and I feel so sad. There is nothing I can do. Do you always know where they're going? Sophie asked. Always, said the BFG. Every night they's yelling at me where they was going. We's off to Mississippi and Mrs. Sorry to guzzle them both. Disgusting, Sophie said. I hate them. She and the BFG sat quietly side by side on the blue rock in the gathering dusk. Sophie had never felt so helpless in her life. We must do something, Sophie cried. Why won't you go and do something? The BFG sighed and shook his head firmly. I has told you 5 or 6 times, he said, and the third will be the last. I is never showing myself to human beings. Why not? If I do, they'll be putting me in a zoo with all the giraffes and the caterpillars. Nonsense, Sophie said. And they'll be sending you straight back to an orphanage. Grown-up human beings is not famous for their kindness. There's all squiffle rotters and grink sludgers. That really isn't true, said Sophie. The Queen of England. You can't call her a squiffle rotter or a grink sludger. Well, she said. You can't call her a squeak pipper or a not butcher either, Sophie said, getting angrier and angrier. The Fleshlumpeater is longing dearly to guzzle her up. Who? The Queen? Sophie cried. Yes, the BFG answered. Fleshlumpeater says he's never eaten a queen, and he thinks perhaps she is a specially crumdiddlyumptious flavour. How dare he? Sophie said. But Fleshlumpeater says there is too many soldiers around her palace, and he doesn't dare try it. He'd better not, said Sophie. He is also saying he would like very much to guzzle one of the soldiers in his pretty red suit, but is worried about those big furry black hats that he's wearing. He thinks they might be sticking in his throat. Oh, I hope they choke, said Sophie. Fleshlumpeater is a very careful giant, he said. So Sophie went silent for a few moments. Then suddenly, in a voice filled with excitement, she cried out, I've got it. By golly, I think I've got it. Got what? Said BFG. The answer, cried Sophie. We'll go to the Queen. It's a terrific idea. If I went and told the Queen about those disgusting man-eating giants, I'm sure she'll do something about it. Never, the BFG said. It sounded like a wonky, tall story. The Queen would be laughing and saying, what awful rub squash. Then it's up to us to find a way of making her believe. And how do you think we could get that to happen? Now hold on a sec, Sophie said. Just hold on a sec, I've got another idea. I think that maybe we aren't going to tell her, Sophie said excitedly. We don't have to tell her. We can make her dream it. That is an even more froth-bunkling suggestion, the BFG said. Dreams is lots of fun, but nobody is believing in dreams either. But as soon as you was waking up from one, you say, oh, thank goodness that was only a dream. Don't you worry about that part of it, Sophie said. I can fix that. Never can you fix it, the BFG said. I can, I swear. But first of all, let me ask you a very important question. Can you make a person dream absolutely anything in the world? Anything you like, the BFG said proudly. If I said I wanted a dream that I was in a flying bathtub with silver wings, could you make me dream it? Yep. How could you mix it up? It's a little bit like mixing a cake, the BFG said. If you was putting the right amounts of all the right different things into it, you was making the cake come out in a way you want it. Sugary, spongy, curranty, Christmassy or globswitchy. It is the same with dreams. Go on, Sophie said. I has dillions of dreams on my shelves, right or left? Yes. Right, said Sophie. I has dreams about bathtubs, lots of them. I has dreams about silver wings. I has dreams about flying. So all I have to do is mix those three dreams together in the proper way. And I was very quickly making a dream where you is in a flying bathtub with silvery wings. I see what you mean, Sophie said. Dreams like being mixed, the BFG said. It's getting very lonely in those glasses on their own. Right, so do you have any dreams about the Queen? Lots. And about giants? Of course. And giants eating people? Oh, lots of those. And about little girls like me? Those is the most commonest of all. I have bottles and bottles of dreams about little girls. And you could mix them all up, just as I want you to. Of course I could, but how is this going to help us? I think he was barking up the wrong dog. Now hold on. Listen carefully. I want you to mix a dream which you will blow into the Queen of England's bedroom while she's asleep, and this is how it will go. Now on a minute. How am I possibly going to get near enough to the Queen of England's bedroom to blow in the dream? I'll tell you later, Sophie said. For the moment, listen carefully. Here is the dream I want you to mix. Are you paying attention? Very closely, said the BFG. I want the Queen to dream that 9 disgusting giants, each one about 50 feet tall, are galloping to England in the night. She must dream their names as well. What are their names again? Fleshlumpeater, said the BFG. Manhugger, Bone Cruncher, Child Chewer, Meat Dripper, Gizzard Gulper, Maid Masher, Blood Bottler, and the Butcher Boy. Let her dream all those names, Sophie said, and let her dream that they will be creeping into England in the depths of the witching hour and snatching little boys and little girls from their beds. Let her dream that they will be reaching into their bedroom windows and pulling the little boys and girls out of their beds, and then do they eat them on the spot, or do they carry them away first? Well, they usually just pop them straight into their mouths like popcorn, the BFG said. Put that in the dream, Sophie said, and then the dream must say that when their tummies are full, they will go galloping back to giant country where no one can find them. Is that all? The BFG said. Certainly not, Sophie said. You must then explain to the Queen in the dream that there is a big friendly giant who can tell her where all those beasts live, so that she can send her soldiers and her armies to capture them once and for all. Let her dream that there is a little girl called Sophie sitting on her window ledge who will tell her where the BFG is hiding. Where is he hiding? We'll come to that later. So the Queen dreams her dream, right? Right. Then she wakes up, and the first thing she sees, she thinks, oh, what a horrid dream. I'm so glad it was only a dream. And then she looks up from her pillow, and what does she see? What does she see? The BFG said. She sees a little girl called Sophie sitting on her window ledge, right there in real life before her very eyes. How is you going to be sitting on the Queen's window ledge, Marta begged. You are going to put me there, Sophie said, and that's the lovely part about it. If someone dreams that there is a little girl sitting on a windowsill and then wakes up and sees it, then it might be the dream coming true. Eyes begin to see where you was driving to, the BFG said. If the Queen is knowing that part of her dream is true, then perhaps she is believing the rest of it is true as well. That's about it, Sophie said. But I shall have to convince her of that myself. You is wanting that dream to stay there in a big friendly giant who can also talking to the Queen as well? Absolutely, Sophie said. You must. You are the only one who can tell her where to find the other giants. The soldiers are only in the front of the palace, Sophie said. At the back there's a huge garden and no soldiers at all. There is a very high wall with spikes on it around the garden and stop people climbing in, but you could simply step over that. How is you knowing all this about the Queen's palace? Well, last year I was in a different orphanage, Sophie said. I was in London and we used to go for walks around there. Is you helping me to find this palace? The BFG asked. I'll show you the way, Sophie said. I was frightened of London, the BFG said. Don't be daft, Sophie said. It's full of tiny dark streets and there are very few people about in the witching hour. The BFG picked Sophie up between one finger and thumb and placed her gently on the palm of the other hand. Is the Queen's Palace big? Huge. Then how is we finding the right bedroom? Oh, that's up to you, Sophie said. You're supposed to be an expert at that sort of thing. And you was absolutely sure the Queen will not put me in a zoo with all the catty piddlers? Of course she won't, she said. You'll be a hero. And you'll have to not eat snozcumbers ever again. You mean it, said the BFG. You really mean it? No more disgusting snozcumbers. You couldn't get me one of those if you wanted to. Humans don't grow them. That did it. The BFG got up to his feet. When is you wanting me to mix this special dream? He asked. Now, Sophie said. At once. Tonight, Sophie said, as soon as you've mixed the dream, we're going to go and see the Queen. Tonight, the BFG said. Why such a flush-bunkin' flurry? If we can't save children tonight, we can anyway save tomorrow's, Sophie said. What's more, I'm getting famished. I haven't had a thing to eat for 24 hours. Then we'd better get crackling, the BFG said, moving back towards the cave. Sophie kissed him on the tip of his thumb. I knew you'd do it, she said. Come on, let's hurry. Now that's 50 minutes worth of the BFG today, so I hope you enjoyed up to chapter 15, The Great Plan. Tomorrow we're going to find out about mixing the dreams and what happens next in our story of the BFG with Mr. Mike. Bye for now.